Welcome to Likable Science. I'm your host, Ethan Allen, here on Likable Science on Think Tech Hawaii. And Likable Science is all about how science is a vital, vibrant, and interesting part of everyone's life, everyone's daily lives. It is not something that is done only in laboratories by strange-looking guys in white coats. Science is really absolutely fun, intriguing, and vital. And we're going to look at it from a little bit different perspective today than we sometimes do. I have with me in the studio today Dr. Zachary Oliver. And Zachary, welcome.
Thank you.
Zachary is the Vice President for Academic Affairs at Argosy University, Hawaii. And so we're going to be talking about a book that he published a little while ago, this book called Falling But Fulfilled. And it's a very interesting story on sort of reflecting on how Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences theory plays out in, not just in education, but really in life itself, and learning in the broad sense, right?
That's absolutely right. Thank you.
Yeah. And I've been reading this. It's an intriguing book. And so maybe you can give us a little bit of background on sort of how you came to write this and a little of your life story.
This is my moment as a strange man in a white coat. I was working on my doctoral thesis on multiple intelligence theory. I was interested in how multiple intelligences might play out in terms of classrooms. Do some people fit better studying online? Do some people fit better studying face-to-face in a traditional format? And that was a very boring book, and I wouldn't wish it on anybody. So please, please do not look for that book. This book is a much more interesting book, and it's much more accessible, and it tells the story of multiple intelligence for the rest of us.
Yeah, exactly. He walks us through in this book sort of some of his early experiences, and very ranging from going off to a monastery when he was 12 years old and having to be silent for hours on end, basically, up to being dumped into a job in Korea on about, 3 days notice or something like that. All kinds of interesting stuff. So it is intriguing, but very nicely woven through is this theme of multiple intelligences. And for those audience members who might not be totally familiar, maybe you can give us a brief encapsulation of Howard Gardner's ideas there.
A brief encapsulation. Let's see. Instead of measuring intelligence, Gardner offers us the idea that we should inventory it, that all human beings, we all specialize in intelligence. We are all intelligent. It's just we are sometimes intelligent in different ways. He says that we have 8 different intelligences and describes each one. And I went through chapter by chapter and described each intelligence in there. That's the short version, the elevator version of Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences.
That's great. That's very, very well done. It is true. I mean, intelligence is a very funny concept. We talk sometimes about intelligence in animals, and years ago, my background is in biology, so I used to talk to a lot of biologists, and I was, one of my colleagues worked with praying mantises, and he made the argument praying mantises are actually very intelligent, and he pointed out they can do certain things that much better than we can do them, and they can grab insects out of the air with high efficiency, and it's a very directed, very sort of intelligent behavior.
Unfortunately, that's not something that's rewarded in our society, right? Grabbing bugs out of the air.
Right. It's very rewarding to them because it's their meals, but it's very limited.
Right.
It's like having one small skill set.
Right.
So the idea of intelligence is really an interesting concept that has developed over time too, and I've been intrigued to watch in recent years the shift from this concept, and I love your use of the word an inventory rather than measure, but the shift from intelligence as sort of a fixed quantity, that is, this is a smart person, this is a less smart person, to this idea of intelligence as a very fluid concept that we can all get smarter if we want.
And not only will we get smarter, we will also change how we are smart, and that different points of our life, different qualities, different applications of our intelligence, so to speak, are more useful than in other times.
Yes, exactly. And it is intriguing to watch this play out. And we all know, of course, as we get older, we get wiser, right?
Hopefully, knock on wood.
What's the old saying is, the older I get, the less I trust the old dictum about age brings wisdom. But we do gain some experiences, certainly, and we learn presumably from all these experiences, and thus we broaden our perspectives and hopefully do become, in some sense, more flexible, more adaptable, more intelligent in some way.
And it shouldn't only be true at the personal level for each of us, but it should be at the species level for all of us as human beings, too. This is the story of science, right?
Exactly. Scientists share information back and forth. They sort of build the body of knowledge of science, make science a more intelligent enterprise, as it were. And indeed, and if that's so, we're really living in a very exciting time, right? Because with the internet now and the fact that we're essentially connected to everyone else in the world, we can share knowledge much more effectively and efficiently than we ever could before. You don't have to laboriously handwrite it and send it off and wait months for it to get around the world. You can...
Unless you're a doctoral student.
Do they still handwrite?
Committee work is committee work.
But so tell me a little bit then about what you did. You did sort of look in initially to this application of these, how these different intelligences play out in the classroom. And did you really find were certain intelligences better sort of suited to classroom learning than others?
Absolutely. If we think of a classroom as being a square room most of the time with desks facing towards a whiteboard, and everybody's focused in the same direction, it's not about discussion or dialogue emerging in the classroom. It's about information delivery from teacher to student. The ability to listen and the ability to stay focused on language for long periods of time is rewarded.
That's right, and so a kinesthetic learner is probably at a disadvantage. The musical intelligence is not often called upon in classroom.
Yeah, unfortunately, after kindergarten, it's not a good thing to sing in class.
That'd be fun to do.
Right.
Start all your classes with a song.
Well, and some teachers have started doing things like this.
Well, you talk a little bit about that in here. About you actually did this in a class you were running, I believe, at some college group, right?
Yes, I was teaching grammar, and you can imagine that grammar is not exactly the most popular subject for students.
Yawn.
And yawn, right? But at the same time, it's really important for us to be able to communicate effectively and to know that we're saying what we mean to say when we mean to say it. Otherwise, we can hurt our relationships with our parents, our loved ones, our employers, carelessly. And so what I did was I'd create a chant, a sort of a call and response with the students, and we'd go through this rhythm of going through each of the rules and as a chant. And after about 2 months of doing this, there was a pretty good chance that this would be remembered. To the point where sometimes I'm walking down the street to this day and I hear someone drive by and yell out the window, "Mister, who did what?" Which was what was one of the chants. So it sticks.
It does. Actually, music is an amazing phenomenon in the sense it really sticks very deeply in your brain. I was at a conference some years ago, and this presenter had said to the audience, "I'm going to play a piece of music here. If you've heard this before, raise your hand." And he played this music, and I was listening to it, made no memory of it, but a number of hands went up in the audience, and he said, "Look around, and what do you notice about these hands?" And the thing was, it was mostly the older people. There were almost nobody below, and almost nobody with dark hair who had raised their hand. And he pointed out this had been one of the very first advertising jingles on television, and had not probably been played in a room for 45 years. Mm-hmm. And these people remembered this, they had not heard it in 45 years.
The musicians that came up with that were truly masters, right?
Well, but music, you'll still remember the songs you sang in kindergarten, right? And we do that.
I still use the ABC song when I'm trying to remember my... I'm sorry, I'm guilty.
A little slow when you have to get to that WXY.
Yeah, it takes a while to get there, but it works every time.
It is reliable. It is reliable, indeed. But yeah, so once you step outside the classroom, then these skills, you begin to see these types of intelligences, suddenly we can see more application for them in a way. You talked about, when we were conversing, you talked about using these in working with the faculty at Argosy, for instance. Can you maybe say a little more about how you try to apply that?
So as the vice president, my job is to create quality, and I do not believe that quality is something that can be inspected. Only non-quality can be inspected. So I try to hire great professionals off the bat, and then engage them in a conversation so that they understand that not everybody in the room listens the way that they speak. Right? You know, naturally, there are some people that can listen to what we have to say. In a room of 20, maybe that's 5 people, have an easy time understanding us, the words that we use, the inflections that we use, the facial features that we have. And for those 5 people, they may have a wonderful experience. Unfortunately, it doesn't make a great professional that can speak to 5 people out of 20.
Right.
It's when we can speak to 10 people out of 20 or 15 people, and we can grow that group that can hear us effectively.
Right, and that is, it is a matter of using the right words, the right kinds of expressions, knowing when to apply different language, as it were, in different situations.
And so it's not just language, it's also all of these other intelligence cues.
Sure, there's your body position, your eye contact, et cetera, et cetera.
When to switch and tell a story, when to switch and have somebody else tell a story, when to move around the classroom, when to have the students move around the classroom. These are all keys that help engage a person in multiple ways for longer periods of time. Right,
yeah. I've sometimes been amazed. I used to attend a lot of conferences on education, renewal, and reform, and was amazed at the number of them that would have somebody standing up in front of you, have a big audience seated in rows, and they would talk at you for 3 hours without a break. And it's like, well,
with a PowerPoint.
Right, friends. You're not walking the talk. You're not modeling what you're telling us to do. You know?
And modeling is a key.
Yeah.
And it's really important for us to remember that the students that sit in our classes they're busy human beings. They have a full life. They have a job. They have perhaps children. They have concerns. They're all trying to reach a higher level of thinking for themselves, for opportunity for their families, and they're entrusting with us that we can be the person to help them take that step. And if we don't return that trust by showing that we understand that each person thinks differently and that we want them to be successful, then we've lost our position, and perhaps we've lost our integrity.
So you're saying that the old sort of assembly line model of teaching is really very no longer appropriate, particularly.
In business, there's a saying that people use all the time: what gets measured gets done.
Right.
And I think that's only true in a stable system.
Right.
I don't think a human being is a stable system. I just put that on the table. So I think that what we see with human beings is that everything gets measured and nothing gets done. Not to put too fine of a point on it, or nothing gets measured and nobody knows what to do.
Right.
So it's a sensitive topic, and we have to figure out the right way forward.
Right. Wasn't it Einstein who said something about not everything that can be measured counts, and not everything that counts can be measured?
Absolutely. And he also said that the solution to a problem usually is not found at the same level.
Right. By the same kind of thinking.
Yeah, the
exactly.
same kind of thinking.
Well, this is excellent. I'm enjoying our conversation, and we're going to come back and we're going to continue it. You're here with us on Likable Science. I'm your host, Ethan Allen. With me here in the studio today is Dr. Zachary Oliver, the Vice President for Academic Affairs at Argosy University, Hawaii. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Jay Fidel. That's Ted Ralston. Ted is the host of Where the Road Leads. It shows every Friday from 4 to 5 p.m. It's about technology. It's about how people collaborating and solve problems with modern technology. It's where the road leads. We all know that. We should all be listening. Join us there, 4 to 5 p.m. every Friday. Now, what about that do you agree with?
All of it.
I knew he'd say that. Aloha. Say aloha.
Aloha.
Good.
Hi, I'm your host on Think Tech Asia, Bill Sharp. I look forward to you joining us each Monday between 4 and 5 o'clock when we film right here in our studio in downtown Honolulu. The show, Think Tech Asia, focuses on contemporary events in Asia. And by Asia, we mean anything from Hawaii, south to Australia and New Zealand, west to Pakistan, and as far north as the Russian Far East. Clearly, this is one of the most economically dynamic centers of the world. and we bring you up to date on what's going on in a whole host of countries in this very vital region. We look forward to seeing you. Aloha.
And you're back on Likable Science. I'm your host, Ethan Allen, here on Think Tech Hawaii. With me today in the Think Tech studios is Dr. Zachary Oliver, Vice President for Academic Affairs at Argosy University. We've been talking about some of the ideas in his book, Falling But Fulfilled, which he lays out some of the applications and the realizations of Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences in sort of a very interesting sort of autobiographical format, showing how these have applied in various different situations in his own life. So we talked a little bit earlier about intelligence, and you made the point that Gardner talks about inventorying intelligence rather than measuring it. So do you think intelligence is ultimately measurable?
I think so to tell the story, I would say that the closest anyone has got to it was a scientist named Spearman, who came up with the quality G. That's the closest anybody's gotten to, I think, an acceptable measurement of intelligence, and that was back in the 20s. And it was widely ignored because it was too complex, and everybody was sort of had already purchased into the IQ model. But I think that that's very flawed. And the problem with measuring is that when we measure, we can also marginalize.
Sure.
And I don't think that's necessarily a healthy behavior, especially when we're thinking about human capacity.
Right. And the IQ test is just inherently very sort of culturally biased towards the type of information we want, we value, we use, and how we present it. There's a wonderful quotation, somebody, I forget who said this, said, if the Aborigine had drafted the IQ test, presumably all of Western civilization would flunk.
Guaranteed.
Yeah, I mean, if I were dropped in the middle of the Australian outback, I wouldn't last a day, I'm sure.
That sounds like Stephen Jay Gould.
It could have been. So then, right, so there it really is this very sort of multifaceted, interdependent kind of system, intelligence that is, with a lot of different ways of being expressed, and some of us are more intelligent in some ways than others, right?
The story of intelligence is only about 150 years old. I mean, the first researcher in intelligence was Sir Francis Galton, was Darwin's nephew. And his idea of intelligence was the speed with which messages go to the brain, and so reaction time is basically intelligence. That didn't seem to resonate for longer than a few years, and then we started measuring brain cavities to figure out, well, there's more brain, right? Then it must be smarter, right? And that got us into some pretty weird situations. And then you have Dr. Binet, who came up with the first kind of IQ test. He was tasked by the French government to figure out with individuals who are Down syndrome, how, at what level should we, the French government, educate them? And so he had to make some assumptions about what is intelligence. And he went with a logic analytic model as being an acceptable definition. But of course, he had no brain research to work off of, and he had nothing, no hard evidence that was the right road to go down. It was a guess.
Right. And different people do show intelligence in very different ways, right? There are musical prodigies who may be very good at music and not much good at much else. Oliver Sacks, in his wonderful book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, I don't know if you recall that one, talks to the two twins in an institution, IQs measured at 70, but who trade multi-digit prime numbers back and forth as a little game among themselves.
What a little game.
Right. When they're doing 6, 8, 10-digit long prime numbers, which I couldn't tell you a 10-digit prime number if my life depended on it.
Neither could I.
So it's very interesting how people choose to sort of use intelligence. But you talked earlier, and I thought it was an interesting point about teaching grammar to your students, and how grammar is actually very important, because if you use grammar badly, you come off as much less intelligent, right? Or at least less educated.
Were you feeling self-conscious when you're asking me that? Like, making sure you control those adverbs? I think absolutely that our society rewards people who can speak clearly and articulately and use words carefully. This is it's a boon. It's certainly been a big help for me as I've navigated into my adult life.
Right, right. If you are coming in and applying for a front desk receptionist position, and you say, "Hey, I seen your ad in the paper," right away, you're not going to get very far in the receptionist job,
Well, it depends on the person on the other side of the reception desk. But this is there is a certain amount of hidden messages being traded, depending on how we speak. In terms of, is this person well educated? Is this somebody that I want representing my company? And these ideas they sneak in the background, even though we're taught not to be biased and to give everybody an equal opportunity. We also listen and we see and hopefully we work through those biases, but sometimes they linger.
Indeed, and that is very. There are very subtle biases that can creep in too, from appearance, from posturing, from just interaction on all these different levels. So, thinking a little bit about science for a moment, how do these ideas play out, particularly in learning science?
Well, let me circle around for a second and talk about Gardner. Gardner came to the realization of multiple intelligence as not, as an accident. He was working at Johns Hopkins, doing rounds with the neurologists, and he was particularly interested in people who have had brain damage. And he found some interesting stories. So you brought up Oliver Sacks,
Right.
and he's a sort of capturer of those kinds of interesting stories.
Right.
Gardner captured some other kinds of stories of people who had lesions on the brain, who maybe lost the capacity to speak. They could not speak anymore, but they could sing. Well, that's strange. How
Right.
aren't they connected? Can't somebody who speaks also sing? Not necessarily.
Right.
So that started showing him that there was a neurobiological foundation to this story, that these capacities to speak and to sing must be different.
Right. Well, the whole, and that actually gets us sort of into the whole mind versus brain issue, which, as I see it, I mean, it's a classic sort of systems thinking idea, is that the mind emerges as an emergent property from the brain being assembled as it is. And you could not predict that these individual little cells shooting electrical messages back and forth. Whatever.
There's a rabbit hole that we're jumping into.
Indeed.
Getting the white coats out.
Well, then let me step back and look at this from a slightly different standpoint then. So you spent a good deal of time, I guess, over in Korea, right? Doing some education early on.
Yes, sir.
In a variety of ways, I guess, educating students of various levels and then professionals and various. So how did that help shape your application of these ideas then?
Actually, I wasn't informed about these ideas at that point, which I think those experiences led me to an awareness that intelligence wasn't a simple process, and that learning wasn't a simple thing, that curriculum can never capture the experience of learning, that experience happens in the moment, and that education is a process of trying to manufacture an experience. We brought up manufacturing earlier. So it's when we're teaching, we're trying to use some curriculum and manufacture an experience and hope that at the end, the objectives will have been reached, that the students will have the awareness about something that they're supposed to know. But everybody in the classroom it has a lot of varied talents and abilities and capacities to communicate. It's not as simple as manufacturing, where we know in manufacturing, the less variation in raw materials, the higher quality product at the end.
Right.
With human beings, the variation is profound.
Right.
So how can we identify a clear end spot?
Right. Probably more so even with today's students than used to be true. I suspect we're getting a broad array of people in various different levels of education.
and ethnicities,
Right.
and philosophical beliefs that are taught at home, and you name it. The world is becoming a more and more interesting place every day. It's wonderful.
Right, so that's why these days, for instance, these robotics competitions are actually quite popular now. They get kids working in teams to assemble from sets of seemingly weird random materials to build robots to do specific tasks. And the kids have to actually break themselves out into different roles. And there may be somebody who's good with the mechanical end of it, and he can actually put the parts together. Somebody else maybe can draw it out and design it. Somebody else maybe is good on being able to discuss it and report what this robot can do.
How wonderful that all those
Right.
different individuals have an opportunity to contribute to something that's meaningful.
Right, but rather than sitting there and having the teacher cover the curriculum, or as some people say, uncover the curriculum,
Right.
it's really much more the point, right?
Well, and there you go. That's the lesson of kinesthetic intelligence, the idea of having hands-on opportunities. It's so important. You know, even when I was teaching grammar, all those years ago, I would have my students come up to the board. So they were moving around and writing on the board and engaging, moving around the room to try and trigger some kind of energy. Otherwise, it became, the environment became too static, and they, close off and fall asleep.
Right, yeah.
So who can blame them?
After relatively few moments of sitting still, our attention drops, our alertness drops. Yeah, it can be a dangerous kind of thing to do.
So you asked me about teaching science, and I would say that teaching science is twofold. On one hand, we have the real visceral experience of running an experiment. And that's so important, as that's the kinesthetic. It grabs the kinesthetic person. It grabs the naturalist person. But then there also needs to be those quiet moments of contemplation that, now that you've done this action, what does it mean? And having that moment of quiet meditation to reflect on it, and then to be able to have space to work it out, to work out those ideas, those questions with peers and with a teacher. Those are the moments that really take the experiment to the next level and really enrich the whole problem of teaching science or anything else.
Yeah, no, and I think you bring up a very good point here, and one that I think we're probably having an increasingly challenging time in our rushed culture. That it is not enough simply to have mastered some set of material and know it, but you must then, as you say, reflect on it. You have to stop for a while and think about, what does this mean? How does it fit in with what I already know? What are its implications for this broader set of knowledge? How might I apply it my next step? If you really want to make the most of it, right, you can't just sort of grab it and go and move along.
Excuse me, I was writing a text message just now. But this is absolutely true. I mean, there's so many messages coming in all the time, and it's really difficult to find a moment to reflect. And yet science rewards those that have the moment to look at what they've done, and to try and look at what they've done always with new eyes. Mm-hmm. One thing since this is a science show, I'd like to say, one thing I really admire about scientists, and I try to work towards this for myself, is the bravery, the courage that it takes to be a scientist. We don't usually think of scientists as being brave. I mean, it's not a high adventurous kind of thing. But a scientist has to reject all of their previous beliefs in the face of new data that is pervasive and compelling, and think about what other kind of life asks a person to be able to, at any point in their career, they may have written 8 books about multiple intelligence or whatever, and if there's a new story about intelligence that comes along that's pervasive and answers the question of how we learn and how we think better, all those 8 books, that scientist has to say, I was wrong. There are very few professions that ask that kind of transparency and integrity of a human being.
Interesting. Skepticism as courage. I like it. We are going to take a short break here. You're here with us on Likable Science. I'm your host, Ethan Allen. With me today is Zachary Oliver, the Vice President for Academic Affairs at Argosy University. We're reflecting on multiple intelligences, as it were, here, and we're going to be right back after the short break.
Here's the deal. I'm Jay Fidel. I'm the host of Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy, which is the Energy Policy Forum's program on Wednesday. That's how we call Wednesday Energy Wednesday. We call it Energy Wednesday every Wednesday. Are you surprised? okay? And we try to get guys like Jim Alberts here from Hawaiian Electric who can tell us what's really going on in energy. We want to be informed. It's so important. It's the most important initiative in our state. Clean energy is major, okay? And that's why we cover it on this show. That's the deal. What do you think, Sharon?
I think that's great. That's why we're here every Wednesday from 4 to 5, and we hope you all join us so we can hear people like Jim coming on our show and co-host Ray Starley from Hawaii Energy.
Okay, Jim, you've been here today. You've seen this. You heard what she said. What do you think?
I think it's a tremendous opportunity for people to come together and talk about the issues. Oftentimes, there isn't a good forum to bring these key issues out into the public, and this is a tremendous way to go about it. And the activity of this show is essential to keep talking about energy because, as you said, it's such an essential part of our lives that we need to pay attention to it and we need to think about the future.
Okay, Ray, your turn.
Well, this is a special time in the history of Hawaii where we're making some pretty radical changes in the way we use energy and generate energy. And this show is the one place you can count on coming to every Wednesday and hearing something about the latest issues that are on the table, being discussed, that will affect us all going forward. So come join us, and if you have some ideas you want to share with us about energy, give us a call and let us know. We'll put you up here and let you talk for an hour. So come see us.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks, Sharon. Thanks, Jim. It's great to be, from Think Tank's point of view, it's great to have this show. We love the show. It's our most important show. So come around and listen to us 4 to 5 on Wednesday. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Aloha.
Aloha.
And you're back with us on Likable Science. I'm your host, Ethan Allen, here on Think Tech Hawaii. With me today in the Think Tech studios is Dr. Zachary Oliver, Vice President for Academic Affairs at Argosy University, Hawaii. We've been talking about his book, Falling But Fulfilled, and the ideas in it on multiple intelligences, reflecting on how multiple intelligences play out in the experiences in our lives and all the learning that happens from those. And so what I'd like to ask you here is, do you think that this kind of stuff, the idea of multiple intelligences, should be explicitly taught to kids at an early age, as sort of a fundamental part of their own sort of help them discover how they learn, as it were?
So that's a wonderful question, Ethan. I absolutely do. In fact, I have 3 children, and I've taught the first 2 about multiple intelligences, and I've asked for them to reflect for me in moments where they're confused about their confusion, and to get them thinking about thinking. I'm sure that sometimes my daughters, the 2 oldest, my daughters roll their eyes at me and they're thinking, oh man, he's going to go through this exercise with me again. But the secret to learning is not in what is learned, but in the process of absorbing information. And that's what the opportunity is with Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences and other kinds of newer ways of looking at intelligence. We don't want to get so stuck in the idea of intelligence's amount of facts that have been absorbed into the brain, or you are acceptable depending on whether you've reached the objectives in terms of you've learned these things. Learning is a capacity to continually adapt. It should never stop.
Right. Indeed, the key thing you want to learn is how to learn, right? You want to learn, and you want to, ideally as a teacher, you want to instill a love of learning in your kids and make them all enthusiastic, passionate learners, right? So it doesn't matter what they learn, whether they go off and learn about rockets or rocks or rock and roll. All those are perfectly acceptable things to learn about.
As long as they're learning.
Right, exactly. Like in John Steinbeck's Sweet Thursday book, I don't know if you remember the story when Doc, this sort of intellectual guy, hanging out with a bunch of lowlifes, and the lowlifes get together to buy him a new microscope, and they inadvertently buy him a telescope.
Oops.
And he unwraps this and says, well, it doesn't matter where you look, just as long as you keep looking.
There you go.
And that's sort of the classic idea.
Nice thought.
Right.
Wide open.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you think this could or should be, these ideas could or should be incorporated? How did you do it for your kids?
I shared with them the story, and I got them thinking about their own experiences And I guess what I'm trying to say here is remembering that learning is a process, and I think as an educator, my job is to get the people who are in my classroom inside the process for themselves, so that they're not just thinking about information, but they're thinking about thinking. The goal, the one quality they really take with themselves when they leave school is, can I navigate a problem?
Mm-hmm.
And we as educators can never, or scientists or anybody else, can never figure out what problems are going to exist in the future.
Right.
So it's important to give them ideas, key ideas that have existed in the past that have helped people navigate forward. At the same time, it's important to teach them that these stories are all continually unfolding. And as they unfold, right, those who can think about thinking the best will be able to contribute to that unfolding.
Right, it's this whole metacognition idea. And
Absolutely. I was trying to stay away from that word, but I didn't want to scare anybody off.
But yes, to teach kids that they are thinkers, that they can use their brains as a problem-solving tool. They have different strategies they can apply, and they can try to think about a problem one way, and if that doesn't seem to be productive, they can stop, they can go back, they can think about that same problem from a different perspective, a different avenue. They can compare, well, neither of those approaches worked well. Maybe we should look at it yet a different way. And that kind
Sounds like the scientific method.
well, it is. And I try to convince people that are always using the scientific method, in their lives.
We are.
Yes, right.
Yeah,
and
we are.
People don't tend to realize it, but even in very simple daily activities, you do use it, When you get in your car and you turn the key and your car doesn't start, you don't immediately propitiate the gods of the automobile, right? You start
It
trying.
depends on how late you are.
You may start cursing the gods of the automobile. But you typically will think, oh, gee, is there gas in the car? Is this the right key?
Did it click or did it not click?
Right. Hear that magic sound. Exactly. So does this then address sort of the issues, and I think it does, actually. I'll give you the answer. I guess maybe how does this really address this bigger issue of what education is all about, right? And there are sort of these multiple ideas about education, why we're bothering to educate people, right? Is it to have them sort of be productive citizens for the society? Is it to have them each discover their own innate talents and maximize those? Is it to have them do a particular job?
All and none of the above, all at the same time. The problem of education, I mean, we know public education started and it's dealing with the problem, and it's hard to think of it as a problem, but we had many different populations represented in America who lived in fairly, enclosed areas according to ethnicity, and they lived maybe their whole lives inside of a 10-block area, and focused, and some of them never learned English. There's an essential problem there. How can we have a functioning democracy if people can't communicate and have no shared experience, no shared values? So building a public education system, I'm a big fan of John Dewey. There was a real nice point there in terms of we need to pull all the kids together so they have a shared experience, and as they have a shared experience, then there's a common identity as an American, and we can have a functioning democracy.
Exactly. This is why the current trend towards sort of the privatization of education I find truly alarming and, quite frankly, frightening. More and more parts of education are being privatized now. There's a greater and greater trend towards suggesting that no, the public schools aren't working, which you can argue that they've done better or worse, but
I'm staying away from that.
that is a controversial point. But certainly, to my way of thinking, at least, the idea of turning all this over to private vendors and letting private businesses run the education system cannot be a good solution.
At the same time, if you have students from all different places in the same place, does it matter who's running it? As long as they're having the shared experience, they're having the shared experience.
True. That is, you're getting right back to the heart of the issue, yes, and having them have these shared learning experiences where they talk the same language, they confront the same problems, they learn to work together in reasonably functional ways as a group.
If those things are taught, if
Right.
we're teaching them to be in teams, if we're teaching them metacognition, if we're teaching them to to process and not to just get the right answer, to get the gold star, to get the good grade, to get, into college.
Right.
Sure, we want people to go to college. I certainly want people to go to college. I'm highly motivated for that.
Right.
And I was told that I was not college material once upon a time.
Really?
So for me to sit here and to say anybody can go to college, it's a matter of digging deep and finding the persistence and the willing to dig in the process of learning and putting the time and the effort into it. So the future, right, is wide open. We know so little still about intelligence. We still know so little about learning. We've trapped education into a model of curriculum and then continually improving curriculum as sort of the validation to objectives, to bits of knowledge that need to be shared with kids and with adults, depending on the degree. But I think what we'll see over the next few years, maybe next few decades, is a movement away from items of information, but rather to processes. We will teach people processing, and we will reward them according to how well they can reason through processes.
That's interesting. There's a current trend now towards teaching coding as a key skill at quite young ages to kids, and with almost precisely that kind of idea that this is a way to get kids thinking logically about constructing arguments, going from point A to point B to point C, making these connections and with a particular goal in mind. And yes, sort of what that goal is almost trivial in some sense. Once they learn to do that process, they can apply that to whatever goal they choose to set or get set for them.
And that ability to take from here and apply it there, it's called transfer in education. Right. So that transferability is critical. I think, something that will also be, seen as some kind of assessment. Ability for a person to transfer knowledge from here to there will be, I think, more and more rewarded by society as we move into the future.
Right. The set of facts that you learn are typically not particularly well transferable. I mean, I know a lot of sort of obscure neuroscience facts, most of which are now out of date and wrong, but they aren't really very useful in a lot of other things. But some of the ways I thought about learning and about how the brain works, these processes, are still things I use every day and I apply. So yeah, it is much more, as you say, a process-oriented. Yeah, the facts of science will change tomorrow, will change every day, but the processes of science go on and keep building new facts, discovering new facts, getting rid of the old facts.
What a wonderful ritual for humanity to engage in.
Right. That's what one of the sayings about it is to keep yourself young as a scientist, you should discard your pet theory each morning before breakfast.
Reference my conversation earlier about courage.
Right, yeah, exactly. No, I like that comment. I thought that was very good. That we don't often think of science as being out there slaying the dragons, but you really are. You're slaying the dragons of the unknown, and at the same time you're having sometimes to slay the dragons of the known around you.
Sometimes the dragons inside of our own heads.
Yeah, indeed. Well, this has been a most fascinating conversation here. I've so much enjoyed this. Again, Zachary Oliver's book, Falling But Fulfilled, in which he makes the sort of, I guess, the metaphor, as it were, that it is not the climbing always that's getting you to where you want to be. Sometimes it's sort of the accidental falling in a way that really takes you where you want to be and gets you done.
Thank you for meditating on the title. Appreciate that.
Well, I've enjoyed this chance to reflect on the book with you, and I hope we'll have another chance to talk here at some point.
It's been a pleasure.
And I certainly thank you very much for being on the show with me. Aloha, Zachary.
Aloha, Ethan.